So, welcome back to Third Age Reforged and to another battle replay, and this one's been in the works for quite a while now, because I remember playing on an older version of this map as it was being made, only back then mechanically there were some issues which meant we couldn't actually finish that one. But this is the new version of CARN, the capital of Angmr, in its newfound glory. You can see it still has some of the similarities to the old version of the map in the sense that it's still got very clearly defined layers to it. Only now there is a little bit more intrigue as you make your way through the settlements. It's not quite as simple as it being a very simple tiered system. Now there are many ways that you can go through, and there are different distances depending on which route you decide to take. But it is still blocked off into these very clearly defined sections of the city, all the way back up to the final stand area over here, which bears some similarities perhaps to Minas Ithil / Minas Morgul in its courtyard-like build-up, but the rest of the settlement is certainly very different and very expansive. This of course was made by WK, and it is one of the, again, like with most of these capitals of many of these factions of Middle-earth, we have seen these before and they are very well documented in the lore itself as well, so it's always nice to see when these maps get a little bit of extra love. And obviously Angmr, the faction that everyone loves to hate, as I always say, and this is, I think, very fitting for them as well. You can see that there's a little bit more stonework to it now, whereas before it was that sort of blackened iron all around, but this looks much more like an actual fortress that could be made, and yeah, going to be an interesting one to see. I mean, in terms of the actual layout, we will of course see the battle as it happens, but yeah, a large first section, then two that split off. There's also another interior wall section over here with all of the crypts over there, and then finally the final stand, which has two routes in, one of which is gated, the other one is not, although the ungated one does have another layer of defense anyway, so we'll see. It's a big settlement. I mean, as much as, you know, these maps used to be labyrinthine at times, these custom maps, that isn't really the case here, but it is still a lot of ground for the defenders to cover, but evil factions of course do have the numbers to be able to do so. We'll go through the attackers first and foremost, and we do have evidence of the wintry nature of this land just a little bit further afield of the citadel itself, and we shall start off with WK himself, who's going to be playing as Imladris. Imladris are a little bit of an enigma on the attack, really, in the sense that they obviously bring an awful lot of quality, and very recently we've seen Imladris at their very best as well, but that was on the defence. When they're on the attack, it can be a little bit more difficult for them. Their lower numbers can leave them wanting a little bit if they do get bottled up, which is relatively easy for defenders to do on more showpiecey kind of maps like this. So we'll see if Imladris can act as a foil to some of their compatriots on the attack today and bring their quality to bear that way. Swords of Rivendell here, with the armour upgrade, it will give them that little bit more solidity against ranged fire, but we'll wait and see how much of that the defenders have brought. There will be some, of course, but it may be that they are reliant on other things to really do the business in melee. But the main thing about the Swords of Rivendell is that pound for pound, one for one, their level of quality is going to be higher than most other units they're going to come up against, but they are a little bit more lightweight. Imladris, however, do have the ability to field the heaviest elven units that the game has to offer. The Elder Runway offer this in a more uniform fashion amongst their high tiers, the Elder Runway Spearmen being the more defensive variant of them. Can last an awful long time in melee thanks to their very high melee defense combined with their very high armour. Obviously this also comes with very high cost, but that really is the thing with Imladris, as it always has been and always will be. There isn't really a noticeable weakness as far as individual units go, and certainly individual fighters, but the cost for each fighter is pretty high. Just over here we have the Imladris Guardians, a very fine unit of line infantry indeed. If you are going to be on the attack as the elves, you need these units that have those defensive attributes, and that shield will be useful, and the armour upgrade as well to make them that little bit more resilient. It makes them quite expensive, of course, but as far as a massable unit of line infantry goes, this could be one of the contenders for the best high tier version that the game has to offer. Another unit of Elder Runway Spearmen, already talked about them briefly. The Arthedain, every time we've seen them in this new patch, they have certainly impressed. The fact that they have traded in their singular hammers for now dual hammers gives them that little bit of extra melee defense. They do have maybe a little bit less damage just in terms of the unit class that they now are, but the extra melee defense really does help And the armor piercing is where most of their damage came from anyway, and that hasn't really been affected at all. And certainly against the orcs, that is going to be very, very useful, as we have already seen in these patch previews. A couple of Norotino warriors, they will of course be returning fire against the defenders in whatever shape that will take. But also the Norotino warriors, one thing that sets them apart is their slightly heightened abilities in melee for their cost, which is not insubstantial, but pretty good in melee as well, which everyone has to get involved in melee at some point or another in these kind of battles, unless they get wiped out by other means. Spears of Rivendell here, the final Imladris unit that we can see. Perfectly good unit in melee. I mean, they do have the anti-cavalry, they do have a pretty good level of damage as well for the class of unit that they are, but they are a pretty specialised unit, and they will need to be used in conjunction with some of the other Imladris units that are in front of them. Now, moving on, we have Cardolan, played by Maven, certainly a more numerous faction than Imladris are. Tharbad Tollkeepers are pretty good defensively, big shield value and, you know, good armour stats as well, considering the tier of unit that they are. However, their melee damage does leave a lot to be desired. When you add the Spear Malice on top of that, they are very much a defensive unit that you can have as part of a general advance, and that's going to be what Cardolan use them for here, certainly. If you want to do a little bit more damage with a basic unit, then the Cardolan Men-at-Arms are the way to go, of course. A sword means they're not subject to that Spear Malice, and obviously as well, they have slightly better equipment just in general. You can see their Númenórean heritage shining through with these new models, which have been implemented as part of the new patch. More Tharbad Tollkeepers in behind all of these siege towers, which will undoubtedly be pushed up to the walls in double quick time. Plenty of Greenway Footmen, the Pike variant, the entry-level Pike units, which time and time again I've stressed how important regular Pikes can be if they're used effectively, and come the late game Pikes can always be the sort of thing which can tip the balance of a battle in your favour, be you attacker or defender. Though the Greenway Footmen, as much as the Tharbad Tollkeepers are pretty resilient, without a shield, they will be subject to pretty high damage from any sort of archer, which targets them down. In a slightly better way for that will be the Wardens of Tir Gorthad because of their better armour, though they will still be one of the first choices of target for any ranged units, but they of course can boost the morale of nearby units, and they're just in general going to be a more effective unit of Pikes on the front line as well, which will allow them to rack up that kill count just a little bit quicker, and it means that they will stand and fight for a little bit longer. More Cardolan Men-at-Arms, Cardolan Archers as well, they're going to be nice and resilient. Most of the Orcs probably won't fancy getting into a skirmish fight with many of the forces from the west, Imladris for their damage, and then many of the Western Kingdoms of Men pack on that plate armour, which makes them pretty efficient for their tier. They're not the most damaging archer in the world in comparison to the elves, certainly, but they will do the job that's set out for them here. And then just in behind we have the Hearthguard of Amon Sul, one of the tankier units of archers that the entire game has to offer, really, though the same thing applies here. Their damage, especially for their cost, is not all that impressive, but their defensive abilities most certainly are. A little bit surprised to have not seen the crossbows thus far. There is the Trebuchet of Númenor, nice to see them again, the Warhammer-wielding units, this time clad in Cardolan's green colours. More Tharbad Tollkeepers, yeah, and here are the crossbows. At the end, the sharpshooters in behind the gatekeepers with a halberd in melee, and just generally the higher tier version, especially with the plate armour upgrade that they have. And the sharpshooters wielding those armour-piercing maces in melee as well, a nice multi-faceted unit for them. We have Tweak, who's going to be playing as Arthedain, Cardolan's sister kingdom. Evendim Spearmen, kind of similar to the Tharbad Tollkeepers really, though I think their damage values are a little bit better actually. The Tharbad Tollkeepers' damage values are pretty low. But you can see I'm wearing the shorts, or kilts I guess if you could call them. They aren't quite as maybe outright resilient as the Tharbad Tollkeepers with those shields as well, but they will do the job. The Evendim Spearmen ever since vanilla have always been known as an efficient militia tier unit. Arthedain Men-at-Arms, very similar to the Cardolan Men-at-Arms in terms of what they offer you. With the full armour upgrades as well for the plate armour, it will make them that little bit more resilient in marching through the settlement. Even though their numbers have been increased, and this class of unit in general for the human kingdoms has been made significantly more viable, they won't win you the battle all on their own. They can be the building blocks that you can then propel yourself forward on, but they will not do the damage necessary to win you the battle outright. Lots of these Men-at-Arms, however, backed up by lots of the upgraded Arthedain pikemen as well, Arthedain have got these mid-tier pikes, Cardolan more militia pikes in addition to their high-tier Wardens of Tir Gorthad, whereas Arthedain have got more professional soldiery to them, which makes sense, and especially when you upgrade their armour as well, they can be a really good all-round unit, this, and it's what gives Arthedain part of their identity. They've always had these pikes, and it's been pretty much an ever-present in many an Arthedainian army for good reason. Just in behind the defenders of Fornost, should be pretty damn good against most Orcish units. They've got the armour that many of the Western Kingdoms are known for to help supplement the good melee defence that swordsmen tend to have, but it's the melee damage which is going to be the thing here, and it should help them really carve through, especially the lower tier, slightly less well defended orcs. We've also got some more Arthedain men-at-arms either side of them. Just in behind we also have the Wardens of the North. Interesting to see if these steel bowmen can get a good angle to really start shooting into defensive positions, because if they can, it can be devastating against the right kind of unit. And they're also pretty damn good in melee as well with those long swords. Just to their side we also have the Sword and Board High Lords of Annuminas. This is the one of the bodyguard units that Arthedain have available to them. Very good defensively, of course, as you would imagine. Sword and shield bodyguard units tend to be rather simplistic in terms of what they offer, but this is the kind of unit, of course, which can take a great deal of punishment and can outlast much of what the orcs can throw at them. And some Arthedain marksmen back here as well, very similar to the Cardolan archers that we've already seen, again with the full upgrades. The helmet model for these guys has been updated as well. It's the main point of difference. The wings are a little bit more pronounced, sort of showing off their Numenorean heritage perhaps a little bit more so than their neighbours to the south. And then we've got some Dunedain scouts over here as well, and a unit of horse archers which can be used a little bit more freely, perhaps to hunt down any wargs which may sally forth on a sort of counter-attacking mission. Sallying out cavalry as well has been fairly commonplace lately. We have Eclipse, nice to see him again. We're going to be playing as Cardolan as well, with some Tharbad Tollkeepers pushing up the ram. Just over here we have, as you would expect really, these sort of human men-at-arms units have been pretty heavily invested in this battle, and Cardolan no different in this army either. Several units of these men-at-arms, 5 in total. We've also still got these Cardolan sharpshooters, of course, crossbows. I mean, if they can get up onto the walls and start shooting down into the defences, that's the ploy with attacking crossbows that can be devastating and really hard to deal with. But it is also going to be quite difficult to get into that position. I mean, CARN DUM is now pretty complex in terms of what it offers, so we'll have to wait and see. Tharbad Tollkeepers and Greenway Footmen once again, so lower end units but potentially really efficient, especially these pikes. Thieves of Tharbad hidden in and amongst them, an assassin class unit that we can't see yet, but they've got the throwing projectiles and they can be pretty devastating in melee, but very lightweight, of course. Wardens of Tir Gorthad once again. Interesting to not see the Annuminas Gate Guards from Arthedain, but Cardolan bringing their own high tier pikes. And finally, some Tharbad Warhammers, sadly without the armour upgrade on this occasion, but doesn't make too much of a difference. The main attraction here, of course, is the massive armour-piercing damage that those hammers can dish out. And finally, on the attack, we have another trebuchet, so it's... actually, no, this is just Eclipse's trebuchet, once again in the green coloration. It's going to be another Arthedain army, this time under the command of Sin of the Dark Cloud. We have plenty of Arthedain man-at-arms once again, so building on the back of all of these human sword and board units, we'll see how efficient they can be. I mean, there's plenty of them, and numbers are going to be on the side of the attackers here, regardless of what the defenders do. And it's rare that the orcs will find themselves outnumbered, but that's exactly what these builds of armies will allow the humans and elves to do. Another trebuchet of Numenor. I mean, CARN DUM's walls are going to certainly be put to the test here with all of these artillery pieces that the attackers have brought. More defenders of Fornost offering again that quality edge to the Arthedainian attack. And then we've got some more Arthedain pikemen back here as well. Trebuchet of Numenor crew and the Wardens of the North as well. I would be very surprised if there weren't Dunedain Rangers skulking about in many of these Arnorian attackers as well. But let's move on to the defenders. Starting off over here, we have Winged Swordsman, who's playing as Angmr, playing on home turf. Of course, Barrow Wights, usually very well known for their ability to march forward and keep an attack going for a long period of time. This time they will be used in a defensive capacity. The Trolls, plenty of these Trolls of Angmr, again, mainly known, especially in this new version of the game, for being an attacking bludgeon, but they can also be committed to a fight that the attackers have maybe under-committed to and smash it to bits very quickly, so the attackers can't afford to be too meek coming forwards, otherwise Angmr in particular have got all of the right tools to smash them down pretty quickly. And the Blackwatch Legion, another unit which we are well known for being an attacking unit. This time, however, perhaps as you would expect of a big shielded unit, they will be put to the test defensively. I mean, mass pushing is unlikely to be how the attackers go about things, but this is the kind of unit that can really counteract that, because of course their mass is so good. What makes them so dangerous on the attack can also make them so dependable on the defence. Plenty of Angmar halberds as well. This is one of the cheap units that can be used to really help shore up the defence for a relatively small outlay. I mean, armour piercing will be useful against all of the attackers to some extent or another today. Maybe less so in Imladris. They have gone for a few more lighter units, but even so, the polearm aspect of this unit is still going to be useful, and they are cheap, but if their formation is compromised, they will get ripped apart by pretty much everything that the attackers have to offer. Angmar Marauders are somewhat similar, albeit they are kind of intended to get torn apart. They will go into melee, they are very numerous, they'll do okay against the very entry-level spears of Cardolan and Arthedain, but other than that, they're here for their numbers, clogging up those streets. Troll Catapult, I mean, artillery is going to play a pretty big part in this battle, I think. The defenders will want to position it just so they can hit the attackers where it hurts as they march forward. I mean, Cardolan's morale is well documented as being slightly suspect, and artillery can make even the stoutest hearts start to waver. Got some Barrow Whites, more Marauders, more Halberds, plenty of these basic Angmar units, maybe dipping into these guys to try and pad their numbers out a little bit, but this does mean I'd expect Angmar's high tiers to be here in reasonable numbers also. I mean, it is a 3v5 after all. We've got more Angmar Halberds, Mr. Sneakman also playing as Angmar, bringing some Witcher-armed pikemen. Obviously they're going to be far more dependable on the front line than the halberdiers. The halberdiers may have that armour piercing, but the pikemen have got far more solidity, especially with the upgraded armour of theirs, the jet black iron, and then obviously the increased range as well. Pikes, Gundabad Guard, a solid unit of spears. Again, maybe not necessarily the most damaging unit in the world against many of the attackers today, but they're going to be here more as a defensive bulwark than anything else. Elsewhere, more Gundabad Guard, plenty of pikes, getting ready to defend this central gate. More Witcher-armed pikemen, more Gundabad Guard working in pairs here. There are going to be some cavalry units. I mean, the Witcher-armed Scourge Raiders are mounted throwing axemen now. The range on them is going to be a bit of a problem if that one unit of Doodle Scouts is going to be tasked with stopping them from sallying out, but we'll see. You know, the cavalry may very well be a late game thing for both sides rather than right from the off, but that rather depends more on how the defenders want to use their wargs more so than how the attackers use their Dunedain. More Trolls of Angmar here in big numbers as you would expect. There's some Orc Fellas, some cheap but, you know, armour piercing, like we already said. It's going to be important in this battle for the defenders because it's going to be universally useful. More Gundabad Guard for the spear line, more Barrow Whites and Witcher-armed pikemen as well. Tommy being the final defender, it's worth saying as well. A second Troll Catapult, again menacing all of this artillery for the defenders. Angmar Halberds, and then as we start to move backwards, we're probably going to get into some slightly more impressive units indeed. Guardians of CARN Doom, again, maybe more well known for their defensive abilities. They're not necessarily going to be able to kill enemy units in droves, as much as they are, technically speaking, a higher tier unit than something like the Cardolan Men-at-Arms or Arthedain Men-at-Arms. Even the Swords of Rivendell could be viewed as maybe slightly lower tier than them, but those factions have all got units which can fill the same role of a higher tier, whereas Guardians of CARN Doom really are Angmar's best bet in that regard. They're here in big numbers though. Orc Fellas for more armour piercing bites. Angmar Marauders back here also from Winged Swordsmen. I mean, there are bodyguard tier units starting to crop up as well. The Witcher-armed Hammer Guard, big armour piercing damage, very, very important. And the Witcher-armed Blackguard as well going to be here. So it's an all Angmar affair on defence, which is very topical. They're going to be shoring things up. We've got Orc Fellas, Halberds here. I mean, I did say that I think the attackers should easily have a numbers advantage, but maybe that's not the case. I mean, Angmar, I still think the attackers will have more on the field, but Angmar have definitely brought numbers as well, so the attackers have to be careful, otherwise their forces may start to sputter out. Guardians of CARN Doom here. We've got more Orc Fellas in front of what kind of looks like a chapel. We've got another force of Scourge Raiders, Gundabad Guard, Snaga Archers. I mean, this is one thing that we haven't seen a huge amount of on the defence, and that's defending archers, and that's because Angmar's archer lineup is the worst of any faction in the game. But you have to have something, surely, to take advantage of that. I mean, it does mean that their upfront infantry force is pretty mighty, and the attackers are going to have their work cut out for them, and positioning is going to be very key. If the attackers can seize the advantage there, the defenders won't be able to punish them for being hyper-aggressive, so we'll see. It's going to be difficult for them to do that, though, with all of Angmar's strengths that they have marshalled. And then one unit of Angmar Marauders way at the back over here, which is actually going to be Mr. Sneakman's general, so his bodyguard units can be used a little bit more freely, but that's pretty much it. No huge surprises, and there may be witches hidden among all of these blobs, which would of course be unsurprising and very, very dangerous for the attackers as they start to make their way through the settlement. They may not be quite as devastating as they were in the last version of the game, but they're still incredibly scary. But we'll have to wait and see. So I'll make a little bit of a cut. We'll see if the cavalry sallies out and starts to trade blows with one another quickly, but if not, we'll be waiting until the first siege towers and rams start battering down the fortifications and depositing their men atop the walls. So yeah, I'll make a cut and we'll rejoin when that is about to occur. Much like the old CARN DUM, these towers are active as well, so this is something which many of the cityscapes we've been seeing recently do not have as a feature, and it's something else which will sort of hurry the attackers along just a little bit more. They won't be able to just sit in front of the walls and expect to take no damage whatsoever. It's not a crippling amount of damage, of course, it never is, but it can be a bit of an inconvenience. The main problem that something like this can often cause is burning siege towers to the ground. We'll see if that proves to be the case. It's also one of the ranged aspects of this battle which will have more of an impact, of course, because archers, as we kind of mentioned already, may not be as important. There is a huge amount of artillery on the field today, which may very well be one of the deciding factors. We'll have to wait and see if the attackers can get into a good enough position. I mean, there's enough space in behind the walls where maybe if they can bank their shots, they could scarcely miss with how numerous the Angmr armies are. If they can get themselves into a good position, I mean, maybe up on that hill. A little bit of raised terrain, give themselves a slightly better angle, trying to go over the walls. Some of these walls already taking hits from the artillery in the distance. Makes an amount of sense as well. You want to go through all the gates, you want to get some units up on the walls via the siege towers, but opening up holes as well, which units can pass through on foot, is going to be a big boon for the attackers. They are going to need to try and split Angmar up as much as possible, because in some places Angmar may be able to cover every angle, but they will have to skimp on quality in certain places. Only their most basic troops, and of course if they're isolated against really anything the attackers have, that's not going to be to their benefit. I'm curious to see how fast the attackers elect to move in. I don't think everyone's quite ready yet to begin the attack in earnest. Eclipse's army still trudging forward, Sin also off in the distance. I mean, the arrow towers are attacking his trebuchet now, and the trebuchet is also vulnerable to getting set on fire, much like the siege towers, so we'll see if that comes to anything. Looks like they are going to take up... No, they're not going to take up a position on the wall, actually. It's like dipping your toe in the pool, and it's a bit cold. Not going in. Not yet, anyway. Arthedain waiting for their allies, which probably is the wise move to be fair. And there is the artillery. The trebuchet managing to get a good hit as well onto these Witcher-armed pikemen and the Gundabad Guard. Now, unfortunately for Sinhut though, his trebuchet is fully in range of the arrow towers. Oh no, it's actually Eclipse's trebuchet, but fully in range of the arrow towers and return fire there from the troll catapult. Surely the troll catapult will be able to hit as well. That was fortunate. The trebuchet 75% damage. Maybe they can survive a hit now from regular shot. Give you a little bit of time to get them out of the way. That'd be an interesting change. Unfortunately, however, Medieval 2 artillery, once again living up to its name, trying to get out of a tricky situation with them, and the crew simply spinning on the spot. That, however, was an absolutely vicious hit on the crew. Not the intended target, I think, but look at how many just died in one fell swoop. And that is a problem as well, because I mean, we have noticed that the Trebuchet of Numenor crew is pretty damn strong. But yeah, classic Medieval 2 AI that, with the siege weaponry at any rate, spinning on the spots. Unfortunate for Eclipse, but in spite of that one good hit, that's nowhere near enough to return the cost involved in the Trebuchet, so he needs to get that other one out of there so that they can get some returns on it. Huge siege tower wall in the way now though. Putting them into place. Meanwhile, there is actually a melee engagement going on through the hole that was made via the artillery. Mevin sending forward some Cardolan men-at-arms and some Greenway footmen as well, so some pikes to try and shore things up over here. This was where the Trebuchet hit, or at least near to this was. Gundabad Guard blocking the way for the time being, and their defensive abilities will be enough to halt Cardolan in their tracks for the time being. And then there is also the Elves over here being surprisingly aggressive as well. Elder Renway Spearmen in the vanguard with the Imladris Guardians as well. Over here will be a different matter, Cardolan being held at arm's length because of their basic nature. But Scourge Raiders will be very important here for dealing that damage to the Elves, because without that, their quality would be sufficient to start really causing some problems for Angmr. Although I'm sure they will be hoping that the Witcher-on Pikemen and Barrow-wights can bog them down long enough for these outside factors to start doing some damage to the Elves. The Trolls fighting up on the walls as well. I am surprised actually how aggressive Imladris are being. I mean, Trolls on the wall I think are going to be an especially potent force now, purely because you can see that as the Elves are just jumping down, they're immediately getting minced by the Trolls of Angmr. I think you'd probably be better off trying to completely avoid them until you have overwhelming numbers on them, because those Swords of Rivendell just got absolutely pasted. In that sort of environment, the Swords of Rivendell, even in a non-enclosed environment like that, wouldn't do particularly well against the Trolls now. The Elves making some pretty decent gains, although WK being the one to be this aggressive is maybe a little bit of a concern later on in the fight, because they can sustain this kind of combat for the least amount of time, the Elves, among all the attackers today. There is also the small matter of those Snaga up on the walls, which will be able to get involved in the fight soon enough as well, and 2 bodyguard units being sent down here as well, Hammer Guard and Blackguard. That'll be enough to give the Elder Renway Spearmen a bit of a fright. And the cavalry moving in as well. Spears will do their thing, but in fair play, the Elves making some gains, and Cardolan doing the same as well, putting more units forward, perhaps inspired by how much ground the Elves were making. Tharbad Tollkeepers moving in to hold the defenders' feet to the fire. And this is a little bit of a problem for the defenders, because it means that they're making gains here, the attackers, although this will be a real problem for the Elves as well. If there's one faction that can't survive too long under the attentions of a catapult like that, it's the Elves. There are also Trolls now involved as well, so he's made his bed now, WK, and he's going to have to lie in it. He's going to have to continue to push forward and hope that that momentum sustains before his army falls apart. Tweaks Arthedain army through the central gate, putting some more pressure on the Angmr over here. Once again, Gundabad Guard and Witcher-on Pikemen at the centre of the defensive efforts, which will suffice for the time being, but we're now seeing the attack spread far and wide. Defenders of Fornost going through one tower, Evendim's Spearmen going through another, so differing levels of quality there for sure. Guardians of CARN are good defensively, although as soon as enough of these defenders of Fornost are in place, you would back the Arthedainian swordsmen to start making some good gains. We'll wait and see. Yeah, pretty much every siege tower now being at least explored, although Cardolan having less success. These Cardolan men-at-arms getting rather caught. There's a huge amount of... That's a weird formation. There's like a huge amount of Orc fellas completely surrounded by Guardians of CARN. That's a very dense position of attackers. Sin's Trebuchet also in place now as well. Flanked as it is. That tower getting destroyed as well. I think not intentionally, but I've already mentioned how the arrow towers are an active threat. Evendim Spearmen. I mean, to be fair, they are forming up a bit of a beachhead. If some better unit was to follow them in, they would be able to force the Guardians of CARN heavily onto the defensive. Further down, Witcher-on Pikemen Still in a good enough position, but Arthedain can at least contest that fight, and the problem is I don't know if any reinforcements will be forthcoming for this outer defensive position, and there's not really any damage being done outside of what's in melee. Ooh. And the Witcher Fire getting utilised. I knew they would be somewhere. And there, Tommy the Rage Quitter. Completely stunting the blossoming Cardolan attack there. And they do still have the support of the elves moving in, but Cardolan, of course, the Witcher's well known for being a bit of a menace when it comes to dealing morale damage. Cardolan a little bit more susceptible to that than most, and indeed this attack does appear to have fallen away somewhat. The trolls being in here is not going to help Cardolan's cause either, because most of their damage dealers are stuff like crossbowmen, which are not ideally suited for trolls, although the elves, in spite of the fact that that catapult was doing its thing, they have made some really good progress here. Then this could be the catalyst for getting all of the other human factions into the settlement as well, and securing the first layer of the settlement. So in spite of the fact that Imladris have, by the looks of things, taken a decent amount of damage, if they do the heavy lifting in phase 1 of the battle, then the Arnorians can maybe do it in phase 2 and 3. Layer 2 and 3 at the very least. Which on Scourge Raiders still being a bit of a menace. Cardolan reloading their attack to a certain extent now. More Cardolan men-at-arms moving forward. Getting involved. The trolls, I mean, they have already been involved in quite a lot, the trolls of Angmr, and they're not quite as resilient as stuff like the Oleg High, so they will start to fall away under this sustained pressure. Having a look up here, I mean, you can tell, I do wonder about what the frame rate was like in the actual game itself. That was the issue initially, when I remember being part of an attempted run of it a few months ago, because this is pretty juddery. Norotino warriors are up on the walls, so they will be able to trade back and forth, shoot down into the units that remain as well, although there's not many of those. And indeed, I think the defenders are doing the right thing by retreating. Orc fellas, the target of the Norotino on the walls. A few more kills, trying to kill off as many orcs as possible. Arthedainians still struggling to clear those walls down there. There's a huge blob of Arthedain troops as well, still trying to make their way through. The pikes for now still holding. That's not going to last forever, however. Not without reinforcements. There are still some extra units down here, and I mean, I suppose over on this side of the settlement there's no real need to retreat for the moment, because Eclipse and Sin have not made the same sort of gains that their allies on the other side have done. Controlling the camera when the frames are tanking like this is really difficult. Defenders of Fornost doing a good job here against the Guardians of CARN. Now extra support as well for the Tharbad Tollkeepers, or from the Tharbad Tollkeepers. A lot of units also making their way through on foot from Sin and Eclipse, just pressurising as many angles as possible. It's going to be a little bit more difficult down here with the Barrow-wights. Halberds ready to move in, Blackwatch Legion also. It's mostly Barrow-wights, however, surrounded by the more basic troops from Angmr, so maybe it will be okay for the attackers with their own basic troops. Tollkeepers and men-at-arms. Not the most damaging force, but you don't necessarily need to be when you're dealing with Angmr marauders and halberds primarily. Halberds, looks like they are kind of set in a good formation though. As if on cue the pikes arrive. Exactly the sort of remedy for a situation like this. I have to say, it's been a while actually since this is almost nostalgic. It would be nostalgic if it wasn't so annoying, but it's been a while since we've had a battle replay where the frames were struggling like this. Tharbad Tollkeepers now fully over the walls and being joined by another one as well. Yeah, these walls will be secured. It's an inevitability at this point. Shooting over Abendum Spearmen, doing okay against the Guardians of CARN. Arrows flying back and forth. Even in a matchup like this, where it was always going to be a little bit less important, the attackers will struggle. The layered nature of CARN DUM means that attacking archers, even if they do get onto the outer walls, it's not really super useful because the inner walls still offer a better defensive elevation, so you can't use them to huge effect. The best time to use attacking archers honestly is now, and that's what they're doing, getting Cardolan archers and Elven archers into play so that they can shoot the units that are still defending the outer layer for the orcs. Some of them getting burnt. But I mean, just stacking up into position now. Arthedain warriors further in. Whitram Hammerguard look like they're counter-attacking actually. And why not? It's only a very depleted unit of Elder Renway spearmen that are over here. Now going back inside, however, I mean, it does risk, of course, leaving the gate open. All of those catapults destroyed. The artillery maybe has been a little bit less of a dominating fixture in this battle than I was expecting, to be honest. Arthedain marksmen firing away. Angmr marauders doing their thing. With the arrival of some Cardolan units to give Tweak's forces at the main gate a hand, they are going to start to wipe them away. There's still the small matter of clearing out the outer wall as well. Guardians of CARN DUM still fighting hard actually, going to win 1-1 against the Arthedain men-at-arms in that mini vacuum that has formed for them. High Lords of Annuminus on the walls as well, heavy hitters indeed. That will be enough to make sure that the Guardians of CARN DUM are no longer in a place to defend effectively. WK continuing to be very, very aggressive as well. The Gwaithir Myrdain moving forward, I mean, of course they will butcher their way through Angmr marauders with ease. And perhaps taking away as much of the defending numbers as possible is the key here. I mean, it is a 5v3, of course. That is always harsh on the defenders, usually because of the numbers discrepancy. Orcish factions can kind of get around that a little bit because of their own ability to pad their numbers with more basic units. Have a few specs of really high quality throughout their rosters, but even so, if they lose too many of their rank and file here, they will be stuck in the same ruts that many other factions find themselves in this sort of matchup. Angmr Halberdiers turning around to try and put a stop to this flank, which Mevin and WK have mounted. Trying to completely secure this outer section. I mean, this is also an area where, if it were any faction other than Angmr and maybe a couple of others, defending archers up on the walls in behind would be a real problem at this point in time for the attackers, because they would have all manner of damage coming at them from that position, but it's not something Angmr can really do. We've already seen, or saw the aftermath at the very least, of the huge damage witches are capable of doing, but ever since then, the amount of damage they've been doing with their ranged support has been more limited than you would hope for from a defensive situation like this, but it's the price they pay for being so resilient and tough with their upfront infantry. Troll catapults now getting into melee as well. You would hope that they've used up all their ammunition as a result of that, but the Troll catapult crew themselves not exactly the last word in terms of quality. Defeat a distinct possibility for them. Further back, Angmr marauders fleeing back to the town centre. They'll probably be perpetually routing as well. The ever-present bug. These halberds still stuck. Getting shot now as well. Imladris Guardians making their way across. It is only a matter of time now. It's a matter of how efficient the attackers can make this. How many units the defenders can still salvage. I think most of the units that are still fighting and have been left behind, there is no salvaging them. It's just a case of hope they can kill what they can before the attack on the second layer inevitably begins. Lords of Illuminus, not taking that many losses, 2 by the looks of things. The Guardians of CARN aren't exactly a poor quality unit, so to take only the 2 losses is quite impressive. Ooh, the Witches though, once again we see only the aftermath. Where did they even shoot from? No warriors? Ah, up there on the walls indeed. I mean, that was a huge blob of mainly Arthedain troops, of course, trying to force their way through the main gates. As was indicated, they may not have access to the archers, but they can do huge amounts of damage in one fell swoop like that. So perhaps that all balances itself out, as much as people may not like the Witches. Hammering away on the walls now. Artillery within the walls. Levin's Trebuchet trying to punch more holes. Of course, with how heavily layered this settlement is, I don't know if you're going to have the full range of ammunition required to put holes in every single layer and use your artillery perhaps. Oh Jesus Christ, the camera's so difficult to control when it's laggy like this. But we'll see. Orc fellas getting into melee. Crossbows as well now. Crossbows going after Hammerguard and Blackguard. An excellent choice of targets. If they can keep that sort of pressure up, it's exactly the sort of loss which the defenders can't really afford to sustain. That level of high quality which all 3 of the defending armies surely have a lot of access to. Well, there goes WK's Elven General. If you were going to lose an attacking general, you probably would pick the Elven one, honestly. The Elves will continue to fight in a way that perhaps Cardolan might not. Even Arthedain. Troll Catapult crew still fighting, victory seems certain. I mean, reinforcements arriving, but it's Greenway footmen also taking hits from the Snaga archers up on the walls. Interesting to see how many kills they got, but obviously we will only be able to see the Elven kills come the endgame splash screen. Defeat seems certain for the Greenway, a large part of that down to close proximity to trolls and continued hits by those arrows, quality notwithstanding. Forward comes some Cardolan archers as well. It's a weird way for them to hold their shields. I don't know if that's a bug or what, but gatekeepers firing away. I mean, I don't think for Gwaithie Myrdain they really did pay the price for their aggression. Ultimately, oh, what happened there? That looked like a direct hit on those 2 from artillery. The walls starting to crumble. Not as many of those Snaga falling off the walls with it as maybe the attackers would have hoped, but preparing the ground for their next attack. Still resistance being put up on the outer walls, however. Surrounded by man-at-arms and toll-keepers. Shaken, exhausted of course. I mean, Angmr being an orcish faction, maybe not as susceptible when they're on the defence because more of their high-tier units can be present, but morale can be an issue, discipline in their low and mid-tiers. Less so in the upper tiers. Dunedain Rangers in a good position in a very dense square up on that one section of wall. In a good place. Another Trebuchet still alive as well since Trebuchet. Barrowite still 65 of them left alive. Oof, dear oh dear, that's interesting. Come on game, hold together. Another hole bashed in the wall. Barrowites. Left behind, but Again, the only problem with Barrowites being left behind like this is they will survive for an annoyingly long time from an attacking perspective, but they're not really designed for dealing damage either, so the amount of damage they're actually going to deal is limited. It's only really useful if, by holding the attackers up here, you're able to deal damage to them through some other means, but that's not really the case here for Angmr, so it's kind of a non-event really, unless damage elsewhere is being focused as a result of the attackers being slowed up there. But I think, well, I mean, the attacker's actually not slowing down at all with that gap now in the wall, the gates open. Cardolan and Imladris continuing to march on. WK Mevin have been consistent with their aggression in this battle so far. Of that there can be little doubt, but it's whether or not they can sustain this while their allies are still dragging their heels a little bit. And unifying your assault is generally pretty important for the attackers. If you can do that, you've gone most of the way to making life extremely difficult in a 5v3. Defense seems certain only a military genius could win this battle. Blackguard moving across as well, menacingly. I think those Sniper Archers might be out of ammunition. Still 26 Hammer Guard alongside them as well. Gatekeepers trying to shoot. They don't really have the angle looking at things from on high like this, however. I mean, they are pretty much two separate sections of the fortress that the attackers are going to be going after now. They're not completely sealed off from one another. There is that route over there, but based on the layout, two distinct parts of the fortress. Yeah, those Barrowites finally getting laid low. The Eclipse and Sin should have more left in the tank as a result of all of this. What else have we got? Again, something's clearly up here. Not sure what it is, but it's a little bit concerning. Hopefully we can get through to the end of this replay without any sort of technical difficulties, as we shall call it. But I mean, that's probably not helping matters. The Witchers, huge amounts of death being inflicted very, very quickly. Again, I mean, we've seen 3 instances now of the Witchers doing huge damage to the attackers as they've tried to keep up their assaults. Surely Mevin and WK must now be running out of steam as well. They're going to need their allies to start taking up more of the slack, I think, in terms of territorial gains. I'm not suggesting that the other players on the field have been not engaging with the enemy to the same extent, but they've certainly been held up more. And that needs to change, otherwise their allies on this side of the field are going to start struggling. Tweak probably is best off sending reinforcements over to this side just to make sure this attack keeps going. And that does look as though that is going to be the case. Some Evendim Spearmen securing the walls. They'll be able to go further along. Scourge Raiders. This attack is now going nowhere fast. Evan's Gatekeepers. I don't know how much ammunition they still have left, but they could be pretty damn important in melee, considering how this fight has gone so far. Blackguard. Crumbles. Another way in. I mean, there's less over here by the looks of things, so there is an opening, I think, for Sin and Eclipse to be hyper-aggressive and start to put some extra pressure on the defenders. I was kind of hoping that the juddering frames would have started to ease up by now, but it doesn't look like that's going to be the case, unfortunately. The more and more units that start to perish on the field, But I think it might be something about the map after all, which is a bit of a shame. There was an instance of this sort of thing before as well. I think it was on a variant of Minas Morgul, which means it might be tied to some of these new assets. I believe on Minas Morgul it was a result of when walls were destroyed, something was up with them. And as these are new entities, I would preliminarily point my fingers at them for this. But that's a matter for another time. For now, we soldier on. Speaking of which, Arthedain moving forward in huge numbers now, which is good to see. Trolls of Angmr also stepping forward in big numbers, however, to try and stop their advance. I mean, there are troll slayers over here. It's at the end of the elves as WK's army run its course. I don't know, let's go over here and try and have a look. I guess it must be. The elves gone. So like I said, I mean, it was always going to be likely that the elves would suffer as the battle went on as a result of their heroics in the first layer. And so it has proven to be. So it's now up to the Arnorians to see if they can see the attackers over the line. Ones of Tingorthad marching menacingly through the gates. Barrow-wights here to meet them, however. Elsewhere, Arthedain pikemen, defeat seems certain. Marksmen. Defenders of Fornos up on the walls, dealing with the remnants of a troll catapult crew. Pikes and toll keepers on the way in as well. The Arnorians still with plenty of numbers, which is why I still think the attackers should be okay. 5v3s always start with a certain edge to the attackers, and as much as the elves' loss is a problem for them, I don't think it's a crippling one. They still have plenty left in the tank, in ways that the defenders tend not to have. Victory seems certain for the Barrow-wights for the moment. Snagar archers moving in, just adding a few more numbers to the situation, but it really is the Barrow-wights here that are the main thing. There's pikes and such, but there's not a huge amount of damage dealers. The Orc Fellas are the thing which comes closest to being a damage dealer here, and their defensive abilities just aren't there. Although against the basics of Arthedain and Cardolan, which is what this attack is made up of, maybe the Orc Fellas can be nice and efficient. Tharbad Warhammers from afar. It's hard to differentiate them when they don't have their armour upgrade, but they are on the walls here. They're going to struggle though. I mean, they're being joined by Thieves of Tharbad, but there's Witchround Blackguard surrounding them, Witchround Hammerguard in there as well, so lots of quality, and swordsmen trying to block any sort of momentum gain that they may get from securing these walls, because then of course they can get their archers and crossbows forward once again and rinse and repeat really. Do the same thing that they did before, although this is a bit of a concern. Getting heavily forced backwards, presumably as a result of the Blackwatch Legion and Trolls mass. Is this the sort of thing the Angmr can keep up? I mean, there's units in and amongst this push, though, is the problem. Stuff like Doom-Line Troll Slayers will be able to do an awful lot of damage, even if they end up getting killed. The damage they deal may be terminal. Still pretty much, well, yeah, completely healthy, and Scourge Raiders, so Angmr with the units that have the highest annoyance factor, perhaps, still doing the business. More units heading up, more Thieves of Tharbad. Splitting the attention of these bodyguard units will give the Tharbad Warhammers a bit more breathing space. The Blackwatch Legion are now on the walls, that's an interesting place for them. I don't really know if they're going to be able to do much up here. Their close melee stats are not ideal, especially against the Tharbad Warhammers. They can try and push through, I guess, which is what they're trying to do. I mean, I'm not sure we've really seen such things on the walls from them before. Plenty of units still in behind. Yeah, and it is Thieves of Tharbad. attacking here as well. Some ruffians, only 22 of them remain. Not an ideal opponent to send against the Witch Realm Blackguard, but needs must. 3 Hearthguard of Amon-Sul. Again, it's usually quite difficult to keep track of everything, doubly so when the frames are taking a dump like this, but didn't see the Hearthguard of Amon-Sul for that moment where it was revealed only 3 of them remained. Our men are becoming tired, the elves aren't even a part of this anymore. Perhaps it's a universal constant for all the attackers. Snaga Archer's victory is almost a certainty. I mean, Angmr, in spite of the fact that things looked a little bit dicey a moment ago when gains were being made in both sections of the outer wall, or the middle walls, they have managed to stifle the momentum in both areas. In one case, even on the other side, start turning the attackers back. Interesting indeed. Defeat seems certain. I'm not entirely sure why they should be winning this, even though it is Blackguard they're facing off against. With their Snaga minions, the layout of this engagement is so heavily against the Blackguard that Cardolan should start to secure this war. It'll be a much needed victory actually for the attackers. They'll start them moving in the right direction once more. Trebuchet Numenor crew getting involved as well. Witch Realm pikemen still holding up nicely on the front line alongside the Barrow-wights. Again, Angmr pretty much one big tar pit in melee at times. What have we got going on over here? Angmar Marauders fighting. And things starting to look a little bit chaotic over here again, which, ironically enough, this is one situation where maybe the Orcs don't want that to be the case. Those trolls are still just forcing their way forwards. Momentum kind of with the defenders at this point, although chasing the enemy too far. May prove to be a problem. Blackwatch Legion. Still Blackguard over there as well, so I mean, quality is still here for Angmr. Can they keep this up? I mean, what do the attackers actually have left in reserve over here? Oh god, these frames. This is torturous at this point, it's actually getting worse. Cardolan men at arms, footmen, I mean they don't have a huge amount, do they? Certainly not the sort of units that you would throw in against trolls and expect them to be immediately victorious. Regular men at arms, pikes. Not exactly the last word in terms of quality. Also chasing them down through the siege towers as well. Worrying signs actually for the attackers, isn't it? Bodyguard units moving as one. I think the issue that they may run into here though is if the pikes can get into a good enough formation, they could hold them at arm's length. Start going about matters in that way. Cardolan men-at-arms are in big trouble however at the hands of Witch Realm Hammerguard, in spite of the reasonably healthy numbers they still have. That will start to dwindle as those hammers start to land telling blows. Worrying times for the attackers, and indeed the game. The unfortunate thing is, if you do, as I am well aware, it hasn't happened in the longest time, touch wood, but if you do crash, there's nothing wrong with the audio, but the recording will corrupt, and so it's completely unusable. So I can't even rejoin the battle from the point that it crashes, and it's something which is starting to enter my mind more and more as the battle wears on. But we shall see. It's pretty much the only thing left over here, so once again, Maven perhaps with some assistance from Eclipse. Fair, those 3 Hearthguard are still alive. Gatekeepers securing position as well, so they have actually regained the momentum over here, the attackers. Cardolan starting their forward march once again. Cardolan sharpshooters, they will be able to shoot into these Barrow Wights. Clear the way for them well enough. Over here as well, sharpshooters making their way forward. Snaga archers, the emergency relief force, probably not ideal. And Tweak's force is also moving across to maybe try and help stem the tide against Sin getting pushed back consistently, but it's only having them spearmen for the time being. They would be okay against Angmr marauders, but it's the small matter of some Witchround Blackguard being sent over to mop them up, against which they will very much not be alright. Not much left in reserve though, is there really? We may not see the final layers. It may come down to victory or death within this second section of the fortress. Defenders of Fornost. Victorious up on the walls, but at what cost? Greenway footmen, late game pikes. I mean, at this point in time, most of Angmar's pikes have surely been used up. So even though the Greenways are very simplistic, just their presence on the field, as the battle gets smaller and smaller, is going to be extremely useful. And indeed, in this sort of engagement, they can just keep the Blackguard in place for a long period of time. Pike and shot as well, you can hear the whiz of those crossbow bolts passing overhead. There's also quite a lot of Arthedain pikemen. So yeah, that is a puzzle for the defenders to try and work out. Their victory over here is pretty much complete. Barrow Wights, much like on the outer layer, as Sin learnt, difficult to fully deal with. Oh god, these frames are so bad. Greenway footmen. Yeah, there we are. Nice slideshow there of one of the generals getting killed. Don't know which one it was, probably Sin's. As I struggle to make my way over to this section. Hammer Guard. Still getting held at arm's length, to be fair, by the Wardens of Tir Gorthard until the trolls arrived. Now surely victory will be Angmar's over here, though the reinforcements they're going to be able to send over to the other section of the fort is not huge, which may prove to be a real problem. Cardolan men-at-arms still alive in there to some extent or another, which is impressive in its own way, but that is going to be the end of these Wardens. Let's try and get a little closer, shall we? 22 Hammer Guard. I mean, all of these bodyguard units are bloodied at the very least. I don't know necessarily if the attackers have actually got that level of quality left to them. Arthedain marksman firing away. So Angmr are actually going to retreat into the final layer of the fortress, so we will see it. The victorious force that was sent out to deal with Sin's Arthedain force is going to move back to the final layer. They're going to be have pot shots taken at them the whole way there. Good opportunity to get some value from these marksmen. Consistent damage dealt. But I think with the numbers that are still remaining, I would be quite surprised if the attackers didn't go on to win from here. Just having a look at what they still have. 179 barrow wights, but again, they need something to be able to deal damage around these barrow wights. Barrow wights will keep you in a fight, but they won't win it for you. Sniper archers, marauders, 5 hammer guard. I mean, the problem is most of the bodyguard units, of course, are still out there, bogged down on those wardens of Tir Gorthad. And now there's going to be no immediately obvious way to get back to the town centre. All routes will be cut off, essentially. If they had that quality at the centre of things, then it might be different, but as it is, I just don't know. Interesting to see if they can maybe flank with those high tier units, however. Because, yeah, taking stock of everything the attackers have, there's nothing really scary about them. Trebuchet of Numenor crew, pretty damaging. I mean, gatekeepers, again, not bad in melee, but any crossbows are really the main threats. I guess we'll just have to wait and see. So the Blackguard are going to try to retreat. And pot shots being taken is probably the best way to go. Try and whittle them down as much as possible. Try and deny Angmr this high tier edge they currently have. I mean, we are into the final 10,000 frames now. Lord knows how much that will actually, how long that will actually take based on the slightly reduced speed that we seem to be going at. Yeah, Cardolan sharpshooters as well, so being able to sideswipe these units with some crossbow bolts as well as some regular arrows. A few more of them fall. A bit more damage being done. All good stuff from an attacking perspective. All they're going to do? Looks like it. Maybe that was their last volley. Which is a worrisome thing in its own way. So the question now, of course, is what do the attackers do? Do they consolidate and attack through one direction? I would be tempted to do that just because of how pike-based their final assault is going to have to be. Though they may have enough to be able to spread that to 2 gates. I'm not sure. Taking stock of what the defenders still have, it is those 2 slightly depleted bodyguard units and the depleted unit of trolls, which will be the high tier punch. The rest, fairly healthy unit of Angmar marauders. That is of course where Mr. Sneakman's general is. Unit of fairly healthy barrow wights, sniper archers that are depleted. Other depleted bodyguard units as well, though that may yet prove to be enough. That other route through, of course, is not actually a gate, it's just another one of those regular openings. My footman. Arthedain pikeman. This is pretty much the perhaps best litmus test of something which I've always said, which even the most normal pike unit can be really, really useful come the late game. So if it comes down to just a pure up-close brawl, I think the quality of Angmar might yet be enough to see them over the line. The attackers are ahead by 3%. That is going to be difficult for Angmar to call back, but not impossible given the level of units that both sides are working with. Question is, when is this assault going to begin? I think we will go up to what passes for ×2 speed. Probably closer to regular 1 speed. I think they're smashing through a gate over there and then what I believe is going on. So they are going to attack from two angles. Men-at-Arms, Wards of Tingorthad, Trebuchet of Numenor, Sharpshooters. I mean, the Sharpshooters' maces in melee may prove to be pretty useful. Give them an extra little bludgeoning damage edge. It's going to be tough though, isn't it? As we wait. There's not that long left in the battle to go, so as soon as this assault begins... Is this gate closed? Doesn't look like it. No. A defender of Fornost. All of these units closing up. I mean, the Barrow-wights get sent flying by the trolls. Very low mass. It's one of the interesting weaknesses to the Barrow-wights that you very rarely see exploited, because you can't really mass push into the orcs, generally speaking. And the Barrow-wights very often are not on their own, but it is something about them. There's more a limitation that's placed on them, so they can't be a real menace on the attack as well. I guess we'll go back down to 1 speed now. Not that it makes too much of a difference, actually, in terms of what we're seeing. There's a lot of pikes though. I mean, the trolls should be enough to deal with those pikes. I thought that was going to be one of the High Lords of Numenor there, but it's actually just an officer. And then over on the other side, Tharbad Tollkeepers are all shaken. That is a problem. I was going to say, considering the amount of frames left in the battle, a mass rout on behalf of the attackers is one way in which the defenders could yet win this, but it's going to be tough. Wards of Tingorthad do encourage the units around them, so they will keep them in the fight, and also the support from some sharpshooters that still have ammunition. Any kills at this point will be welcomed, just to really hammer home that numbers advantage that the attackers do now have. Now, you know what, ×2 speed isn't really making a difference to the overall quality of the visual experience anyway, so why not have 4 frames at a time instead of the 2 that we were getting just a second ago. Victory is almost a certainty for the Barrow-wights. That's an interesting thing. The trolls pretty quickly evaporated by the looks of things, but they've been in combat for such a long time in this fight, doing a lot of heavy lifting for Angmr. It's no surprise that they finally gave up the ghost. Sharpshooters. Victory seems certain. I mean, the Witchround Blackguard being in here probably isn't helping matters. Attacking general, that's not the sort of thing which Cardolan can afford too much more of. And it is a mostly Cardolan attack at this point. There's not much left from Tweak's Arthedain army. Though every last man may count. Of course, as if right on cue, here come the Arthedain marksmen, 119 of them. Helping to keep this attack going, because it was actually starting to... You're starting to see the light at the end of the tunnel there if you were the defenders, but 119 extra combatants is perhaps a little bit disheartening. Much like my inability to use the camera when it's like this. Hearthguard of Amon-Sul, only 3 of them, but again, every little does help. I think the problem is the defenders are doing pretty well over on the other side, but there's a certain inevitability to an attacker victory over here. There are Witchround Blackguard over here also, but they are more depleted. Also the Trebuchet of Numenor crew will be in here somewhere, utilising those hammers. The Wards of Tingorthad are a better unit of pikes, so it's actually over here perhaps, especially with that ranged support, that the attackers are at their strongest, and it's where the defenders are at their weakest. One sharpshooter, so getting into place. Just remembering as well that I drew comparisons to Minas Ithil and Minas Morgul with that sort of central star fortress in the middle as a sort of final stand, pseudo-final stand location, and maybe I was tempting fate with the frame rate. Very unfortunate. But yeah, the arrival of those Arthedain marksmen has re-stabilised the front line over here. It's more going to be a case of how long it takes to bring down those Barrow-wights. Victory is almost a certainty. Blackguard still fighting hard. Yeah, these pikes though, Greenway footmen, 56 of them routing. That's not ideal. Cardolan once again showing their mental fragility. If you just keep your cool in this situation, if all of your units remain fighting, you almost certainly go on to win. But routing is how the defenders can still turn this one around. The marksman shaken up as well. There's no morale boosting units over here, I don't think, unless there's like one Warden of Tin Gorthad or something in and amongst all of this mess. But I don't think there is. So the attackers will be hoping for a swifter victory over here. Gatekeepers, yeah, I think they see the necessity in trying to speed things along a little bit. Angmr Marauders, still eager, interestingly enough, in close proximity to the Witch Realm Blackguard. Perhaps giving them the encouragement to fight on. Now they're shaken, of course. Cardolan sharpshooters and some of the gatekeepers as well getting up onto the walls if they still have ammunition. That spells trouble for the Angmr defending the other gates. Don't know whatever happened to the Witchers. Maybe they were committed in melee at some point and perished. But even their contributions in this battle, it's looking like, are not going to be enough to prevent the elves and the men of Arnor put an end to the Angmr threat once and for all. That's probably Mr. Sneakman's general. Another reason why those Angmr Marauders were probably sticking around in the fight for so long, to be fair, but that is now victory for the attackers there, and probably victory for the attackers across the whole field at this point. As that other force makes its way along. As long as these Arthedainians can just remain fighting for a little bit longer, they will receive the support they want. That is ultimately going to be that. I'm going to see what time 6 speed looks like. Honestly, not that much quicker. As is often the way when the game is struggling like this. Like I said, it's not been the sort of thing which I've had show up for quite a while at this point, but it is what it is. Yeah, Gatekeeper's shooting in. The attacker victory is now pretty much confirmed. It was up in the air for quite a while in that fight though. Differing fortunes really for the attackers and the defenders pretty much all throughout the fortress though. When that is the case, the attackers in a 5v3 often just have the numbers to be able to ride out the storm in ways that the defenders don't. And like I said, even when the defenders are orcs and they do have access to more numbers, it's still something that they have to contend with as well. I don't think they were quite able to on this occasion. Victory now a distinct possibility, so yeah, the late game pikes didn't let me down. They did in fact prove my point, which is heartening to see. What else have we got going on? Trebuchet and Numenor crew still very much alive, 35 of them. Their damage won't go amiss in finishing these Barrow-wights off. not really much else to say about this battle at this point, is there? Everything we can see in the camera is the entirety of the battle, and indeed moving the camera, as it has proven to be in this battle, has been, shall we say, less than desirable. But case there are. Scurrying along the walls, the gatekeepers. They must be out of ammunition by now. Get those halberds involved. Finish the barrow whites off as quickly as possible for my own sanity. Although of course we know exactly how long it's going to take. Ones of Tingorthai proved to be an important unit in the late game as well. They of course are a little bit more pricey as far as pike units go, but that morale boosting capability they have, very much worth it. There goes the final Angmr in general. Yeah, the balance of power can often be skewed by units with a lot of hit points, and that's often why the announcer will always fancy Angmar's chances when they've got the barrow whites on the field and trolls and witches, because they've got several hit points, and the announcer will look at it and go, yeah, they are in control. But it's not necessarily the case. Indeed, I think we've known that for a little while at this point. I just noticed those two Angmr halberds joining the fray as well. They aren't going to last too much longer now, are they? Seems certain for the barrow whites, you don't say. I think it is just the one unit of barrow whites that remains as well. I mean, obviously the downside of late game pikes is it does take a little bit longer for you to finish off your enemy, just because they don't have the highest amount of damage. Even something like the Warns of Tingorthai will take a little bit longer to kill their foes. There's not really a whole lot else to this army, really. The gatekeepers have got a bit of damage to them. Trebuchet and Numenor certainly do. The Tharvad Tollkeepers don't, however. Still a few Cardolan men-at-arms left alive as well, so no high tiers really left. An interesting thing. Let's see if we can hurry this up just a little bit more. It's not as if we're losing much in the way of visual fidelity at this point. Why not turn it into a sort of stop motion horror? Even like this is going to take a while, and I think the problem, it's gotten exponentially worse as the battle has gone on. Well, maybe not exponentially, but it's gotten worse as the battle has gone on, which, oh, there was another Angmar general. Wild. But yeah, it's too similar to the problem I used to have on Minas Morgul for it to not be the same thing, put it that way. It's unfortunate, but it is what it is. What are you going to do, right? It's definitely not to do with the amount of active combatants on the field, otherwise the frames would have got better as the battle went on, which is what I was hoping for, but in the end, very much not the case. This problem only gets exacerbated when you have a battle which is a bit of a monster and is over 40k frames like this, as you would often expect from a large-scale settlement like this. Oh, really? Oh, it could be over by now. Why persist? Why, Mr. Anderson? Why? I'm still alive. There's one red arrow that's over here that's the culprit. Of course, right in amongst all of these dead bodies, probably. Now, you know what? Who cares? I'm not even going to give it the airtime. I'm going to get out of there. Because the frames hate it over there more than anywhere else, by the looks of it. Dear oh dear. can't even turn the camera effectively now. Soon enough we'll get to the end game splash screen, I promise. We sputter and wheeze our way there. I think we're nearly there. The player admitted defeat thing is taking a hell of a long time to get out of the way. Perhaps another casualty of this. Please don't tell me he's running away and trying to kite. Who is this? Who is doing this? Well, whatever the case, they're going to kill whoever it is in double quick time. Well, there we have it. It's a very nice looking settlement. Surprisingly nice sunset as well for a part of Middle Earth, which is pretty harsh. Yeah, well, someone won. That's certainly true. I think the attackers were just about worthy victors here, because I think the way that WK and Mevin handled things early on kind of set the tone, really. Eclipse and Sin had a much harder time of it, actually, throughout the entirety of the battle. But the momentum, while it did shift fairly violently throughout the field, the attackers never completely lost it, I don't think. They never were getting completely turned back. As much as Sin was getting pushed back, they were able to hold their ground on the other side and then sort of readjust and start moving on. And yeah, I think, you know, textbook controlled aggression is how the attackers were able to do this. They weren't fully in sync with one another, which is perhaps why it was as close as it ended up being in the end. But they did a good enough job that wasn't really too much of a problem. So a big thank you to WK for sending this one in, and of course creating the map. It's a real shame, honestly, that the frames did what they did, but I can only assume it's something to do with the new structural models, because that was the problem. Minas Morgul was always the most infamous example of that, and this was pretty much exactly the same as that used to be. And whenever there's bad frame troubles like this in terms of recording, it very often boils down to something about the assets on the map. It's never really the amount of troops that are on the field, unless it's like a scenario where there's just like the entirety of all 8 armies in one big cluster, then it's the troops. But outside of that, it's never really going to be a problem. So it has to be something to do with the assets, unfortunately. So hopefully that can get fixed, because I imagine that there was probably some sort of problem when they were playing it as well. Maybe not quite as pronounced, but I can't imagine it was a buttery smooth experience if this is what occurred during a replay. I don't know. Maybe we'll get some feedback on that in the comments below. Hopefully it didn't ruin it too much, because it is a great map, and that was actually a very good battle as well. Slightly soured by the technical difficulties that we were undergoing there. But yeah, let's see what did the damage for the elves. Gwaithir Myrdain did very, very well for themselves. They were getting involved right from the off. A lot of those would have been against Angmr Marauders, in all fairness, so the quality of those kills is in question, but they were also going up against and ultimately died to Witch Realm Blackguard, so they were taking on a big workload throughout. Eldrenway Spearmen and Imladris Guardians first through the breach, and it set the tone, really, that the elves then carried on until their demise, pretty much dead on the midpoint of the battle. Several other units breaking 100, a few not really doing as well, but when you're on the attack you can't pick and choose. You know, all of your units are not going to do amazingly well, because some of them are going to get focused down by defenders that have put them in a compromising position, so that's always going to be the case. And obviously that does sting a little bit more as the elves, because you're spending good money on even your most basic units, but that is the price you pay for having the extreme level of quality that especially Imladris get to traffic in. Though perhaps Imladris's more defensive nature compared to the other elves, the fact that they combine that really nice armour along with the elven skill, stands them in better stead in this sort of situation where they do have to get their hands dirty and get involved in an offensive siege as well. So yeah, lots of kills for Mevin as well. For the defenders, pretty even across. Well, I say that, like the gap of 1,000 kills, but I mean, if you're getting 3,200 kills as Angmr, that's always going to be a good thing. Winged Swordsman getting 4,300, not quite enough in the end, of course. the standards you have to reach as 3 defenders against 5 attackers is extreme. And even for a force like Angmr, where everything is sort of set in stone with regards to how you play and the units that you bring and what you do with them, even with them, it's all going to come down to, you know, how you play, and you've got to be basically flawless. And I don't really think the defenders did anything wrong here today. But yeah, it is what it is, isn't it? So there we go, another custom map, another faction capital that we get to see a nice makeover of. Again, hopefully the technical issues can be ironed out of this one, we shall see. As far as other sort of maps like this that may be upcoming, I don't know when it will be ready, but I have seen screenshots of Arthedain, so Cardolan will be getting their own dedicated faction capital map as well, in a similar way to how Dorwinion got Coruscant as a completely new edition. Cardolan will finally get their own variant of that, so that'll be interesting to see. Outside of that, I'm not sure. As we move along into the final weeks of the year, I've got pretty much all the content I could need to see me through until the start of 2024. I think, though, obviously more trickling in is always welcome, because stuff like this is always going to get bumped to the front of the queue, of course. And there will be a channel update just before or just after, one of the two, over the just before or just after Christmas. That's going to be where that lies, and it's going to be an important one as well, because there's going to be again, there's always been a certain level of uncertainty. I feel like, you know, this time last year I was saying kind of the same things, although it's become much more. It's become a much keener thing now. But yeah, I mean, we'll see. It's something which I'm still drafting out. But that will be something which will take up one of the midweek slots as well, in and among all of the Silmarillion replays that we've started to occupy those positions with obviously the weekend spots being these slightly larger Reforged battles that we often do. But yeah, anyway, enough of my rambling. Big thank you to WK. I hope you're not too disappointed that the frames did what they did, but it is what it is, I guess. Big thanks to all the players for being a part of this battle as well. I hope you enjoyed this.